Talk about the migrant crisis, which comes back to haunt us in all its many awful forms, and the latest sort of offshoot of our ongoing escalating migrant crisis is that British taxpayers, it transpires, are footing the bill for £1.2 million a year to pay for Albanian translators. Translators for suspected Albanian criminals who come into this country allegedly illegally, in other words, by dinghy. We now know that as many as 8 out of 10 of every single migrant that arrives here dubiously on a dinghy and pitches up on our beaches having crossed the English Channel are from Albania, where there's no war, there's no torture. There's no war or torture in France either, so why we even entertain letting these people stay at all is beyond me. But why are we, you know, that it costs us more than £1 million a year on translators so that we can speak to these people who have broken our laws quite clearly. I don't get it. I mean, why don't we just say, never mind the translators, turn them round and send them back? Let's talk to former Brexit Party MEP and chairman of Brexit Watch, Ben Habib. Hi, Ben.
Hi, good afternoon, Kevin.
£1.2 million a year on Albanian translators, confirming what we all now know, that a major problem of our migrant crisis is that as many as 80% of all of the people who cross the channel in dinghies and pitch up on our beaches are from that country. They're from Albania, where there's no war and there's no torture. Why are we getting translators? Why don't we just turn them round and say, off you go, back to your country where there's no war and there's no torture?
Well, the idea was, I think, that Albanians would be sent straight back, that they wouldn't be kept here. And, you know, that is a staggering amount of money to be spending on translators alone. £1.2 million while we've got a cost of living crisis, while the Chancellor is busy reversing all the Prime Minister's plans for growth because we can't afford them. We're actually providing these criminals, and we know they're criminals because they've taken over large swathes of the drug trade in the UK since they've got here, with that sort of service. And I think in total, Kevin, we're spending something like 20 or 30 million a year on translators across the board, effectively, again, for criminals. It's a complete travesty. And, you know, the cost of housing these illegal migrants and providing them with all the welfare that we do so generously provide them is about £5 billion a year. That's the equivalent of the tax cut that Liz Truss wanted to give basic rate taxpayers and that Jeremy Hunt has just reversed. We could afford to do so much more as a country if we got a grip of our borders and, you know, put the money to use in the country rather than squandering it on these people who've got here illegally in the first place.
What's your take on the new Home Secretary, Suella Braverman? I mean, I like the cut of her jib, I must say, but there are worrying signs that she may just be treading in the footsteps of her predecessor, Priti Patel, who talked the talk but never walked the walk, made a lot of announcements. We're going to do this, we're going to do that, we're going to solve this, Rwanda. Nothing ever happened. Suella Braverman made an extraordinary statement last week. She said, at the moment, the French are only stopping 40 to 50% of the migrants who want to come across the Channel. I need that number to go up to 80 or 90%. Two things to observe there, Ben. One, surely she should be saying, I need that number to go up to 100%. We need to stop them all.
Yeah.
And secondly, I'm not noticing the French stopping 40 to 50% of all migrants crossing the Channel. This is fantasy, isn't it?
I mean, you know, the French are part of the problem here. What we've been doing with the French is paying them to stop this flow of people. But of course, if they were ever to give effect to their obligation under that scheme, they would cease to get our money. So we've set up a trap for ourselves where we're paying them money which they would never want to turn off. The French are doing close to nothing, you know, to close the routes from France to the UK across the Channel. The French are part of the problem, they're not part of the solution. We have to take unilateral, like so many things the country is suffering with at the moment, we've got to take unilateral British action We can't rely on the French. We cannot rely on the EU for a whole load of other matters on which we seem relentless to rely on them. We've got to take matters into our own hands. And that's the point about being an independent sovereign state. That was the whole point about Brexit, taking back control. If we can't, at the very basic minimum, control our borders, we cannot claim to be a sovereign nation. But by the way, I do think Suella Braverman is in a different league to Priti Patel. I think Suella has got a supreme brain. She's completely committed to championing British causes. But like so much else that is in government, she's got it wrong on the French, I'm afraid. And she's probably beginning to, butt up against that blob that we know stands in the way of ministerial will. But, no excuses for Suella. She's the Home Secretary. She needs to get this bull by the horns and she needs to deal with it. I think she is making changes to human rights law in the UK so that, for example, under the Nationality and Borders Bill, there was the right to send people back. There was, greater provision for the UK government to send people back. But then there were carve-outs and exceptions, and she's going to remove those exceptions. But still, this is not a matter of getting the French to do it. It's not a matter of having a proper deportation program. It's a matter of having robust physical border control at the point of our territorial waters. And I had another great idea put to me this weekend, actually, funny enough. I was staying with a friend of mine, and he said, well, if the French aren't doing their job, why don't we send in drones to do it for them? Why don't we send the SAS in to the beaches in France and sort out these smugglers? It wouldn't take long to sort these smugglers out. If the French won't do their job, why don't we do it? That's the kind of unilateral action we should be thinking about. I can imagine if you clip what I've just said and tweet it, the whole kind of woke world is going to go mad. But that's what manning your borders is about. It's taking direct control.
Yes, indeed. And the Prime Minister, or the current Prime Minister, Liz Truss, stated not so long ago, rather depressingly in my view, Britain will not be leaving the European Convention on Human Rights. Do you think Suella Braverman has got the gumption to persuade Liz Truss to do a U-turn on that? Because as we now know, Liz Truss is very good at U-turns. Because unless we get out of the European Court of Human Rights, the European Convention of Human Rights, we're never going to get a plane off to Rwanda. We're never going to be able to get rid of these migrants once they arrive here. We need to leave the ECHR, don't we?
Well, we definitely need to resolve our own domestic law as far as it comes to dealing with these people. And if that requires a variation to our Convention of the Human Rights, or whether we need to leave, that needs to be looked at. But as I say, prevention is much better than cure. We've got to man our borders. And while we're talking about squandered money, sorry, I'm slightly darting all over the place, but while we're talking about squandered money, can we ask Rwanda for the 120 million back that Priti Patel handed over? What we haven't, is you
by the way, Ben, as you say, they took 120 million quid of our money and then subsequently announced, oh, by the way, we can only take 200 migrants, which seems rather absurd. It seems like we shelled out a bit too much on all of that, didn't it?
A bit too much, no. Yeah. I mean, the whole thing's terribly disappointing. And it's one can't see it in isolation. It's part of a much bigger failing at the heart of government. You were talking about police just before I got on, and how the police have become woke. That's part of the same problem. The reason we haven't got the courage to defend our borders is the same reason the police have gone woke. It's the same reason that people like Lawrence Fox are forced to fight for freedom of speech. The culture wars is part of the same problem. Our inability to stand up for Northern Ireland against the EU is part of the same problem.
Ben, I'm going to have to stop you there, but we're on the same page as usual. Thank you very much for your time. That's Ben Habib, former Brexit Party MEP and chairman of Brexit Watch.